People of Azerbaijan mark the 25th anniversary of Bloody January tragedy. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev paid a tribute to the victims of the Bloody January 1990 tragedy. The president laid a wreath at the Eternal Flame Monument as the military orchestra of the Defense Ministry played the national anthem of Azerbaijan. The commemoration ceremony was also attended by state and government officials, leaders of religious communities, ambassadors of foreign countries accredited in Azerbaijan, and representatives of international organizations operating in the country. On the day of national mourning, the movement of traffic and pedestrians was stopped for a minute in the memory of the victims of the January 20 tragedy. A minute of silence was followed by horns of ships in the Bay of Baku, subway trains and railway trains.
The date of 20th January is written in blood for Azerbaijanis across the world. It commemorates the day in 1990 when peaceful demonstrations in Baku were violently suppressed by Soviet troops. During the night of 19th to 20th January, 26,000 Soviet troops invaded Baku to quash the uprising, acting in the wake of a state of emergency declared by the USSR Supreme Soviet Presidium, signed by then-President Gorbachev. The suppression was brutal and uncompromising. Altogether, 133 Azerbaijani civilians were killed and approximately 700 people were wounded. The victims included elderly people, women, children, and even medical personnel. The killings were indiscriminate, with the slain including Azerbaijanis, Russians, Jews, and Tatars. In addition to the massacre in Baku, killings took place in the Lankaran and Neftchala regions of Azerbaijan, claiming the lives of 26 people. Despite the seriousness of this act of oppression and the role of the Azerbaijani resistance movement in expediting the fall of the Soviet Union, awareness of Black January has been seriously overlooked in the Western media. Mikhail Gorbachev is lauded in the West. However, he should never be forgotten as the main perpetrator of the bloodshed in Baku. On 27 April 1997, he declared in a speech in Istanbul that the death weighed upon his conscience. He commented that proclaiming the state of emergency in Baku and sending an army to the city was the biggest mistake of my political life. To date, no criminal has been prosecuted for the Baku massacre. Although the Soviet government attempted to rewrite history claiming the massacre was a measure to protect Russians and Armenians from pogroms, it constituted a use of military force against its own civilians. The sole objective was to maintain the rule of the Communist Party in Azerbaijan and make this an example to the organizers of resistance movements in other republics. A Human Rights Watch report entitled Black January in Azerbaijan clearly states, indeed, the violence used by the Soviet army on the night of January 19th to 20th was so out of proportion to the resistance offered by Azerbaijanis as to constitute an exercise in collective punishment. On January 21, 1990, Heydar Aliyev, who was living in Moscow at the time, went to Azerbaijan's permanent representative office in the Soviet capital to flatly condemn the crimes perpetrated by the USSR leaders against Azerbaijan and its citizens and express support for his people. In a statement made at the meeting, Heydar Aliyev gave a political assessment of the tragedy. As far as the developments in Azerbaijan are concerned, I'm convinced that they run counter to the rule of law, democracy, humanity, and the principle of state building in our country. A number of international organizations and foreign countries, including Turkey, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Arab states, and Iran, condemned the Soviet troops' brutal attack on civilians. However, this did not stop the people of Azerbaijan from continuing their just struggle until the achievement of national independence in 1991, which in itself stands as the best memorial for the victims of Black January. Azerbaijani people remember and widely commemorate the January 20th tragedy every year, which has been immortalized in the collective memory of Azerbaijan as the day of nationwide sorrow.
On January 23, 1990, by the decision of the Supreme Soviet of Azerbaijan SSR, there was a parliamentary commission to investigate the circumstances and causes of the tragic events connected with the intervention of troops in Baku. The commission was composed of 20 deputies. Commission members urged all citizens to witness the tragic events of January in possession of information, film and photographic evidence to inform the working group. Investigation group received more than 2,000 letters. 2,500 people were interviewed. 250 inspections were conducted at the crime scenes and objects made more than 286 examinations. The commission has employed the professionals, academicians, independent military experts. It was revealed that the military used tear gas and bullets with a displaced center of gravity. Gennady Melkov, member of the military expertise, said the situation was created when the troops marched from the airport and they just were so feared for his life that once there was a shooting somewhere, so they opened heavy fire. And among those who were sent were Armenians, which in turn destroyed primarily over Azerbaijanis themselves. We investigated everything.
Уничтожали прежде всего, конечно, азербайджанцев как таковых. Мы расследовали абсолютно все.
Documentary was not captured a single person's thriller. In fact, there was no resistance.
Человека, боевика, с оружием в руках.
Member of the Commission of the Inquiry Sabir Rustamkhanlı said the Commission has done a great job. The Commission was in Moscow, held meetings in Baku, met with all members of our Central Committee. Videos were made, collected 60 video cassettes. Then they all disappeared. I cannot say what happened to them, what structures saved them. Statement on the outcome of the commission was announced on third session of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, but the Supreme Council evaded special discussion on bringing the justice those governing the introduction of troops in Baku and violated the constitution of the USSR. Session of the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, instead of political assessment of the January events in Baku, took a rather strange ruling. On the situation in the Azerbaijan SSR and the Armenian SSR are measures and normalize the situation in the region, taking into account the findings on the Commission of Inquiry composed by the parliamentarians, Minister of Internal Affairs of the USSR, KGB, and was instructed to investigate the crimes committed on January 20th. Procurator's offices mandated to deal with military prosecutors almost made it impossible objective investigation. Military prosecutors closed the case due to lack of the 104 crimes and military actions. Thus, the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, in essence, refused to give political and legal assessment of the January 20 tragedy. Only 4 years later, in the decree of the Azerbaijani President Heydar Aliyev, on the occasion of the 4th anniversary of January 20 tragedy, it was noted that the political and legal assessment of the tragic events of Baku still not given, and holding of the special meeting of the Milli Majlis took place. New investigation of the bloody events started. The Prosecutor General of Azerbaijan was requested as soon as possible to finish the job and bring the perpetrators to justice. Prosecutor General's office announced the perpetrator of the January events the Soviet leadership, a criminal case against the former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev in violation of the Article 119 of the Constitution of the Soviet Union and 71st of the Constitution of the Azerbaijan Soviet Republic. But unfortunately, direct organizer and participant aggression, Mikhail Gorbachev never punished. There are crimes that verdicts are not issued by the courts, but the history. I think that it's a crime pretty much applies to this kind of crime, in which the court makes history. It is his judgment, in the sense had created. Azerbaijan said, who was the culprit of these crimes, but bring them to justice, especially after 20 years, unfortunately not possible. January 20, 1990, Soviet troops in Baku made one of the bloodiest acts of terror. That night, the Azerbaijani people showed the world their determination to resist the most severe tests in the name of freedom and independence of the country, not even for the sake of sparing his life. Fatalities in January events, martyrs entered into dedication, bright page in the heroic Azerbaijani people. On January 20, 1990, when Soviet troops entered without warning in Baku, blocked the work of the public broadcaster, blowing unit and capturing mails and depriving thus Azerbaijan on communication with the outside world, military commanders have forgotten about the film studio Azerbaijan Film. And there was everything you need: cameras, laboratory, operators, lighting, editors.
Вот здесь, на этой киностудии, тот самый штаб сопротивления был устроен. Здесь, на этой киностудии.
Here in this same studio, headquarters of the resistance was arranged. All available cameras for shooting, we made them ready.
Отсюда выезжали на съемки, сюда приезжали.
We were going out here, shooting, coming back urgently, projecting. We opened here 3 holes in case of ran films if somebody would come after us.
Мы сделали 2 или 3 дыры в заборе, я уже не помню, чтобы в случае чего через эти дыры уносить готовый материал, если бы к нам вошли.
Ramiz Fataliyev proposed to divide the world into 2 parts. Firstly, what was shot directly in the night, and secondly, what was filmed after January 20th, next days and months. Murder of defenseless civilians by Soviet soldiers continued in February and March.
Метров через 150, 200, этот проспект плавно перейдет в площадь, которая сейчас, сегодня, по памяти...
In 200 meters across the pamphlet going smoothly in this area, which is today in memory of those events, is called the area of January 20th. The main massacre took place here.
Живое мясо. Люди гибли там, на этой площади.
Raw flesh and people were dying there on the square. They crushed, shot at the point-blank range, tank shells and machines. Well, everything was thrown at the slaughter. Later it became clear that during the massacre there was used at least 3 types of bullets, which at that time were forbidden to use. Soviet troops did not spare anyone. Emergency room doctors were killed while trying to assist the wounded. White robes did not save nurses. Standing in the street, even a street person was dangerous. Soldiers could go and ask to transmit documents if something would have not liked. This is how time was at that period. There was a taxi driver without passengers. Here, where I show, stood nearby outfit consisting of 1 officer and 2 soldiers. There was something with the car, probably something faulty with the machine. It was an old Gas 24, if I'm not mistaken, grey color. He sneezed silencer. This is not very similar to the shoot, but soldiers thought it was so. All 3 officers and privates instantly shot the taxi driver. Driver died on the spot.
Не очень похоже на выстрел, но, видимо, у Сахи глаза велики, да и ситуация была такая. Все 3, и рядовые, и офицеры. Только офицер из пистолета Макарова, а они из автоматов Калашникова. Обернулись и мгновенно расстреляли это такси. Шофер погиб на месте.
In the Soviet press, there was serious campaign against Azerbaijan. They were even printing different texts in the same numbered newspapers, just because one party was the Azerbaijan and the other for the rest of the Soviet Union. Ramiz Fataliyev, together with the writer Anar, appealed to their colleagues. Two of them, the director Stanislav Govorukhin and writer Olzhet Süleymanov, arrived in Baku. Govorukhin was sure that Azerbaijan itself to blame for what happened, but when he saw the vast military shelling of civilians, understood the truth.
Случай произошел вот тут, за моей спиной. Средь бела дня. Примерно в это время, может быть, чуть раньше.
The incident occurred here behind my back, in broad daylight. Around here, this time maybe a little earlier. This spot was a 16-year-old guy looking at the street. In his hand there was nothing. He stood like that, holding the railing with both hands, leaning against the glass. Somewhere there was a drunken soldiers. One of them stood up, started shooting at the bus.
Стоял наряд. Или просто они там ходили. 4 человека. Вот этот бадан пьяный.
Young boy died. He was still there when we arrived. Just dragged him out in the street. His lifeless body was covered with a tarp. And then I asked to take out the tarp. At that time we were already accustomed to these such scenes, but Govorukhin saw with his eyes and he returned to Moscow indifferently.
Слава все увидел своими глазами. В Москву вернулся совсем другой Станислав Govorukhin.
Objective information about the tragedy of Azerbaijani people began appearing from everywhere. One video convincing rigidity of Soviet power in relation to the Azerbaijani people was sent to Moscow. Before the session, deputies of the Supreme Soviet could see those episodes. Then, head of the Soviet Union Mikhail Gorbachev did not like the idea.
января это наша боль.
January 20 is our pain and our tragedy forever. Now I remember how people were united at that time.
На нашу долю выпало очень много. Я, когда вспоминаю те времена,
due to that films, Ramiz Fataliyev was arrested twice by the Soviet leaders. First time he was helped by Nikita Mikhalkov. The second time, Ramiz Fataliyev came to receiving convoy. Everything was filmed in the days left in the history of Azerbaijan, remain in the hearts and minds of all those who saw these pictures.
Tragic night of January 19th to 20th claimed the lives of civilians, women, men, old men and children. Vasif Babayev remembers these events as clearly as if it happened only yesterday. Remembers rallies demanding an end to the misinformation coming from the official state media. Remembers shooting on armed population. Remembers January 19th when unit of the state-run radio and television was blown. In that hour, television program was preparing to release the news. The officer disappeared as if nobody was guarding the TV and 2 engineers. A day later, they were found in the police department.
Они все рассказали, как было.
They told everything explicitly, how unknown people entered the power unit, put some bags under the television equipment. Then the 2 engineers were taken by those unknown men who were guarded by commandment. They took them there, and then after the explosion on the night we rushed there, wanted to ask the leadership of the military who did it, what happened there. They threatened us with the guns in their hands, ordering us not to interfere in their affairs.
В комендатуру где была дислоцирована.
On January 20th, at the request of Deputy and Chief Director of the State TV Radio Broadcasting, several cameramen took to the streets to shoot the tragedy of the Azerbaijani people. Today, their footages are broadcasted by many TV channels around the world.
А потом, когда после взрыва ночью
I again express my gratitude to them. Those heroic guys were not afraid of anything. Due to the curfew hours, they were not allowed to shoot any footages in the streets, but they managed to shoot all.
выгонять, что мы сейчас перестреляем вас.
All those footages were shown on TV only after a year in 1991.
Я опять им приношу свою благодарность.
Till January 26, we defended television and radio, and at night of January 26, they took me from my house. Even before I was told, Wasif, you will soon be taken away, you calm down and go home. When they began to call frequently at the door, I realized and began to dress and wanted to sneak in through the balcony. And my daughter said, Dad, where are you running? Are you covered? You did not do anything. Then no one thought that it all might get.
Мы держали оборону.
Radio and television of Azerbaijan resumed its work only on January 27th, immediately after the arrest of undesirable persons whom the Soviet government considered so. To bring the truth to the world about the tragedy was difficult, but due to courageous cameramen of that time, now the whole world knows the true face about the January 20 events.
Вы это видите в картинках.
You see them in the picture, but I was a witness.
Эпизоды, которые перед моими глазами были.
Asad Zada often went into the internet in order to speak with those whom they acquainted with the horrible night, survived the night of the January 20th.
Значит, Белым домом, да, это аппарат президента.
I saw a Russian soldier in front of the presidential administration. I wanted to go to them, wanted to scream on them. Why do you shoot the people? At that time, one woman catched me and said, Son, don't go there, they kill everyone. They shot on my car 43 bullets, 3 of them hit me. Tanks crawled through the barricades, crushing its past cars and ambulances. Against the unarmed civilian population of Baku, Soviet divisions were the Soviet army. On that day, Asad Zada miraculously survived. He was taken to the hospital with severe injuries. It was impossible to go to the hospital, impossible to enter there, because military unit there fired from the roofs. How we entered into the hospital, I don't know up to now. Doorstep was covered with blood. And when I went, I saw our car. As far as shooting, all of it was broken, and I realized that my husband was wounded, if not killed. In that ill-fated night, bus with civilians was fired, killing many passengers, among them 13-year-old girl. January 20th was the last in the life of Larisa Mamedova, as she was returning home with her father.
Смотрю, людей полным-полно, но я поняла, что же Ларочки нету. Зашла это самое. В дом зашла, людей много.
There was some hope that Larisa could survive, but when I arrived home, I saw a lot of people.
Ничего мне не говорит. Шубка на ней.
And then I realized that I had lost my daughter. Larisa was laying, her face in several places was punched with glass.
Я шубку открыла, смотрю, стекла от автобуса полным-полно.
Glass from the bus on her blouse and red spot. A bullet hit her heart.
Мелочь, стекол, вся в обуви была. Вся в обуви. И на кофточке, она у нее желтенького цвета была, и на кофточке пятнышко красненькое. Пуля ей попала прямо в сердце.
It is an irreparable tragedy for Mamedovs, never be erased from memory. Galina's husband survived but became disabled. The bullet hit him in his leg and shattered bone. The tragic events of January 19th, 20 of 1990 mark a turning point in the story of Azerbaijan's independence from the Soviet Union. Every year at the end of January, Azeris enter a period of mourning for their loved ones who were lost in the attack by Soviet military forces who stormed Baku and murdered hundreds of civilians.